Predator becomes prey in the Florida Everglades as hundreds of hunters descend on the Sunshine State to catch and kill as many Burmese pythons. Burmese pythons have devastated native wildlife in the Everglades.
New footage from the Florida swamps has revealed something no one was expecting. And when scientists pressed play on the trail camera clip, the room did not go quiet because of what they saw. It went quiet because of what it meant. For years, everyone thought they understood the ending of this story. The Burmese pythons arrived. The mammals disappeared. The Everglades went silent. That was the narrative. An invasive predator entered one of the most fragile ecosystems in North America, multiplied in the shadows, and consumed the food web from the bottom up. Raccoons vanished. Marsh rabbits disappeared. Bobcats collapsed. The swamp that once moved with life became still.
The whole thing is weird that they allowed those as exotic pets.
Yeah.
And then these people just let them go in the swamp.
Mm-hmm.
And
The whole thing is weird that they allowed those as exotic pets, and then these people just let them go in the swamp. But the footage recorded last year inside Big Cypress National Preserve showed something different. Something 2 decades of field surveys, millions of dollars in removal programs, state-funded hunts, thermal drones, and professional snake trackers had never produced. A sign that the swamp was changing on its own. Not because humans fixed it, not because technology finally won, not because the invasion was over, but because the ecosystem had started answering back. And that answer raised a question nobody in the room could comfortably explain. What happens when a broken wilderness begins fighting for itself? The invasion. No one stopped. The Everglades was never just a swamp. That is the first mistake people make. It was a slow-moving river of grass spread across South Florida, a vast subtropical wilderness that filtered drinking water, softened storm surge, recharged aquifers, stabilized weather patterns, and supported one of the most complex food webs in the United States. Its ecological value has been estimated in the tens of billions of dollars every year, not because it looked beautiful from the air, but because of what it quietly did. The Everglades protected, it absorbed, it filtered, and inside that system, life was everywhere. Waiting birds moved in huge flocks over the sawgrass. Alligators ruled the channels. Raccoons, opossums, bobcats, marsh rabbits, foxes, white-tailed deer, and the layers of the ecosystem had been building for thousands of years. Then, in August 1992, Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida as a Category 5 storm. Winds tore through neighborhoods at more than 165 miles per hour. Houses were flattened, buildings were shredded, and near Miami, a reptile breeding facility was ripped open. When the storm passed, Burmese pythons had escaped into the wetlands. Another part of the problem was that there was a wildlife research facility where they're studying pythons, and somehow or another it got destroyed in a storm, and the pythons got out. But Hurricane Andrew was not the whole story. It may not even have been the biggest part. Throughout the 1990s, Burmese pythons became popular exotic pets. They were cheap, impressive, and easy to buy at reptile shows. A baby python could fit in someone's hand. It looked unusual, exciting, harmless enough. But baby pythons do not stay babies. In just a few years, that small snake could become a 10-foot, 50-pound predator. And when owners realized they could no longer handle them, many made a decision that felt merciful in the moment. They drove to the edge of the Everglades and let them go. They told themselves they were setting an animal free. What they were actually doing was releasing a biological weapon into an ecosystem that had no defense against it. For years, almost nobody noticed. The pythons moved silently through grass and water. They blended into the mud, vanished under vegetation, and bred in a landscape that seemed designed for them. South Florida gave them heat, humidity, shelter, water, and native animals that had never evolved around a predator like this. The Burmese python is built for ambush. Its scales disappear against dead grass and dark water. Heat-sensing pits along its jaws detect warm-blooded animals in total darkness. It can hold its breath underwater for long stretches. A raccoon moving at night may never know the snake is there until the coils are already around its ribs. Then there is the breeding. One female can lay up to 100 eggs in a single clutch. With no natural predator controlling the population, the numbers climbed fast. Today, estimates suggest there may be between 100,000 and 300,000 Burmese pythons across South Florida, and then the data arrived. In the hardest hit areas, raccoon numbers had crashed by more than 99%. Opossums were down almost as far. Bobcats had dropped dramatically. Marsh rabbits and foxes were functionally gone in some survey zones, not reduced, erased. Biologists who had spent their lives working in the Everglades described something they struggled to explain. Miles of habitat, where animals once crossed roads and moved through brush, now sat empty. No rustling, no movement, no small mammals appearing in the headlights. The swamp was still alive, but something essential had been eaten out of it. The invaders had found paradise, and they were swallowing it whole, hunting ghosts in the grass. Florida's first major response looked from the outside almost like spectacle. The Python Challenge, an open call for hunters to enter the swamp and remove invasive snakes. Cash prizes, headlines, cameras, annual coverage. It gave people a sense that something was being done, but the math was brutal. In 2024, the total haul was 195 pythons. Removing a few hundred snakes from a population that may reach hundreds of thousands is like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. Since 2017, professional paid hunters have removed more than 23,000 pythons. That sounds enormous until you realize it may still represent only a small fraction of the total population. The problem was not effort, it was the animal. Thermal drones struggled because pythons are cold-blooded and the Everglades itself is hot. Mechanical decoys failed because ambush predators do not chase fake prey on command. The Judith Snake program, where tagged pythons lead researchers to others during breeding season, worked, but not at the scale needed to collapse the population. The hunters were dedicated. The technology was real. But the swamp was bigger than both. And then field teams began noticing something that made the problem more unsettling. The pythons seemed to be changing their behavior. Traps that worked one season stopped working later. Productive hunting areas. The snakes were not avoiding humans by accident. They were increasingly moving away from human activity corridors. That could mean individual snakes were learning. Or it could mean natural selection was doing something colder. The careless snakes were being removed. The wary ones survived, and the weary ones bred. Either way, the result was the same. An apex predator that was already difficult to find was becoming better at disappearing. Florida had thrown hunters, drones, traps, and tracking programs at the invasion. And the invasion was adapting. But then the next twist arrived from a place no one expected. Not from a hunter, not from a drone, not from a government program, from something microscopic, something that had been moving through the swamp unseen for years, the invisible weapon. While researchers focused on python numbers, another invader was spreading through Florida, almost silently. Its name is Rhiolitella orientalis. Scientists call it the snake lungworm. And when Dr. Cristina Romagosa, a research scientist at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, encountered it in native Florida snakes, she immediately understood that something was badly wrong. She was examining native species, garter snakes, pygmy rattlesnakes, and other common animals that should have been healthy. But they were not healthy. They were thin, weak, moving slowly, struggling to breathe. When she opened them, she found the cause. Their lungs were filled with tiny worms. Dozens of them burrowed into tissue, blocking airways, feeding on blood, spreading through animals that had never evolved to carry them. This was not a small outbreak. It was a hidden invasion. The lungworm is native to Southeast Asia. Burmese pythons can carry it because they have had thousands of years to tolerate it. But Florida's native snakes had no such history. The transmission chain is disturbing. An infected python leaves waste in swamp water. Cockroaches consume that waste and pick up larval parasites. Frogs eat the cockroaches. Native snakes eat the frogs. Then inside the snake, the larvae do not remain in the stomach. They tunnel through the stomach wall. They migrate to the lungs. They attach, feed, and multiply. As the infection worsens, the animal weakens. It stops eating. Its breathing becomes labored. Eventually, it suffocates. Researchers have found cases so severe that lungworms were crawling from snakes' mouths as they died. And then came the darker discovery. The parasite had already moved beyond the Everglades. At least 18 native snake species were infected. The lungworm had been documented far north of the original python strongholds, reaching toward Jacksonville. And worst of all, it no longer appeared to need Burmese pythons to keep spreading. It had jumped. It was now transmitting through native snake populations on its own. Even if every python in Florida disappeared tomorrow, the parasite would remain, self-sustaining, permanent. So, the Everglades was being attacked from two directions at once. From above, pythons were consuming the mammals. From within, lungworms were damaging the reptiles that held the middle of the food web together. But in the middle of that disaster, Roma's team found one result that did not fit. The Florida cottonmouth kept coming back clean. This venomous pit viper, living in the same infected habitats as other snakes, showed no signs of lungworm infection across multiple surveys. No worms, no respiratory distress, nothing. Something in the cottonmouth's biology was making it resistant. No one knew why. Maybe it was immune response, maybe blood chemistry, maybe venom composition, maybe something no one had identified yet. But the implication was enormous. If one native snake had somehow cracked the biological code, that resistance might be the key to protecting others. Scientists marked it as one of the most urgent unanswered questions in Florida wildlife biology. And while they were still trying to understand it, Florida announced a plan that sounded insane to almost everyone who heard it. They were going to release more snakes. The king returns. When people heard that Florida officials were putting more snakes into the wild, the reaction was immediate. Wasn't the whole problem too many snakes? People compared it to ecological disasters like cane toads in Australia, a human solution that became its own catastrophe. But this was different. The snake being released was not another invader. It was a native predator returning to a kingdom it had lost. The eastern indigo snake, the longest native snake in North America. A shining blue-black animal that can grow up to 9 feet long and behaves like the ruler of the forest floor. The indigo is a snake-eater. It does not constrict prey like a python. It pins animals with powerful jaws and swallows them alive. It is immune to the venom of North American pit vipers, rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, copperheads. It eats them without consequence. For a long time, nothing on the forest floor could stop it. But the indigo did not vanish because another predator defeated it. It vanished because its habitat disappeared. The eastern indigo depends heavily on gopher-tortoise burrows for shelter and temperature control. Those burrows, protected from Florida's heat and occasional cold snaps. But as development destroyed longleaf pine forests and scrub habitat, gopher tortoises declined, and when the tortoises disappeared, the indigos disappeared with them. By 1978, eastern indigo snakes were functionally gone from North Florida. For decades, conservation groups worked quietly to reverse the loss. They bred indigos in captivity, restored longleaf pine habitat, reintroduced gopher tortoises, prepared protected areas like the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve so the snakes would have the ecological structure they needed to survive. Then, in late 2023, a trail camera captured the footage researchers had been waiting half a century to see. 2 small eastern indigo hatchlings moving through the underbrush. Noter animals, Wildorn. The first eastern indigos born in the wild in North Florida in about 50 years. Dr. Kevin, a herpetologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, was among those who saw the footage. He had spent years helping release and track these animals, watching some survive and others vanish. But this was different. This was proof. The king was not just surviving, it was reproducing. For the first time in half a century, the emperor of the forest floor was rebuilding a wild population on its own. And while that was happening in the north, another unexpected shift was unfolding farther south. Native animals that had spent 20 years being eaten were beginning to fight back. The home team fights back. For 2 decades, the Everglades story moved in only one direction. Pythons were the predators. Native wildlife was the victim. The invasion spread. The mammals vanished. The food web collapsed. Then Bartok's team picked up a transmitter signal from a Burmese python named Loki in Big Cypress National Preserve. Loki weighed about 50 pounds. Field teams had been tracking him for weeks. When they followed the signal to its source, they did not find a living snake. They found a carcass. The python's head had been chewed off. A nearby trail camera recorded the encounter. The killer was a bobcat, a native bobcat weighing roughly 25 pounds, about half the size of the snake it killed. It had stalked the python, found the opening, attacked at the right angle, and won. According to people familiar with the footage, Bartoszek watched it and went quiet. Then he wanted every nearby camera checked immediately because this was not just one strange event. Reports from across South Florida had begun showing other native predators interacting with pythons in new ways. Alligators ambushing smaller snakes, a Florida panther filmed taking down a mid-sized python in the Sawgrass, native predators learning where the python was vulnerable after a large meal. During water crossings, during moments of exposure, during the brief gaps when even a perfect ambush predator was not fully ready. This does not mean the pythons are losing. They are still winning by numbers. One bobcat cannot undo 20 years of collapse, but the dynamic has shifted. It is no longer pure slaughter in one direction. For the first time, it looks like a war, and wars can turn on moments nobody predicted, which brings everything back to the footage that started the story. Because the swamp is now moving toward a collision that no one has ever documented. The eastern indigo population is spreading. Wild-born snakes are beginning to expand from restored habitat in North Florida. At the same time, Burmese pythons have been pushing north, following waterways, warming temperatures, and connected habitat corridors. Their ranges are moving toward each other. No one knows exactly when they meet, but eventually they will. An eastern indigo, fast, aggressive, immune to venom, evolved to hunt other snakes, facing a Burmese python that may outweigh it by 40 pounds. The indigo's strategy is not size, it is speed, jaw strength, pressure, refusal to let go. It has taken rattlesnakes, it has taken cottonmouths, but it has never met anything like a full-grown Burmese python. No one has documented that fight. And then comes the darker possibility. The lungworm is also moving north. If the eastern indigo expands into infected territory before scientists understand whether it has resistance, it could walk straight into a biological trap. The parasite that has already crossed into at least 18 native snake species could reach the very animal conservationists hope will help restore balance. 50 years of restoration work could collide with a parasite no one knows how to stop. That is the real aftermath the cameras revealed. Not victory, not collapse. Something stranger. A damaged ecosystem searching for a new balance between an invasive giant, a microscopic parasite, a native predator returning from near extinction, and local animals that are finally learning how to fight back. The bobcats are learning. The king is reproducing. The cottonmouth may be carrying a clue. And the swamp, after 20 years of silence, is no longer passive. But nobody knows who wins. Does the eastern indigo arrive in time? Can it challenge the python on its own ground? Does the lungworm reach it first? Does the cottonmouth's resistance unlock an answer? Do bobcats, panthers, and alligators learn fast enough to matter? No one has those answers yet, and that is what makes the footage from Florida so extraordinary. For the first time in 2 decades of slow collapse, the ending is no longer certain. The Everglades is still wounded. The invasion is still real. The parasite is still spreading. But the swamp has started moving again, and the next chapter may be the most violent, unpredictable, and important one yet. Drop your prediction in the comments. Who survives this battle? The invader, the parasite, the king, or the home team? Subscribe now, because the swamp has more to show us, and this story is just getting started.